When German forces captured a single American truck, they had no idea it would reveal a fatal flaw in their war machine. 3 Wehrmacht mechanics captured a truck, and in less than 5 minutes realized Germany had already lost the war. Not because the truck was powerful, not because it was modern, but because it exposed a weakness Germany could never fix. The first thing they noticed, every tool they needed was already on the truck. The second, a single wrench could open half the vehicle. The third, this machine was built to be abused and built by the hundreds of thousands. At that moment, they understood a truth their officers refused to see. You can't fight an enemy who replaces losses faster than you create them. And this forgotten inspection, this quiet moment beside a dusty French road, revealed a secret that rewrote the balance of the entire war. Because the moment they understood what this truck revealed, they also understood there was nothing Germany could do to stop it. The story begins earlier that same morning. A scattered American convoy had been caught in a brief Luftwaffe strafing run, one of the last the region would ever see. Bomb casings, splintered crates, and burned rubber marked the road like a trail of abandoned hope. Most of the U.S. vehicles had escaped, limping eastward, but one had not. A GMC CCKW canvas, shredded engine still radiating warmth into the cool French air. To the 3 mechanics of the 276th Infantry Division, it was just another spoils of war formality. The Wehrmacht had captured Allied trucks before. Some were useful, most were ignored. None had changed their understanding of the war. This one would. They approached cautiously at first, not out of fear. The vehicle was clearly empty but out of habit. The front lines near Feilitz had been collapsing for days, and uncertainty clung to every kilometer of road. But the closer they came, the more ordinary the truck looked, too ordinary, like something mass-produced for civilians, not crafted for a global war. The youngest of the 3 climbed into the cabin. The seat springs groaned, but the structure held. Everything felt basic, sturdy, functional. He pulled open the glove box and found a manual printed on thick paper with diagrams so clear even a barely literate farm hand could understand them. The others circled around the front. One gestured for the hood to be lifted. It rose smoothly, too smoothly. No hidden catches, no clever locking arms, no unnecessary reinforcement, just a hinge, a simple hinge. Underneath lay the engine, a 6-cylinder block arranged with almost arrogant clarity. Wires routed in straight lines, spark plugs placed where a child could reach them, filters mounted without obstruction. One mechanic muttered, "This isn't engineering. This is instructions." 1. The eldest corrected him quietly, "No, this is designed for war. I would not." He lifted one of the tools from the mounted kit on the truck's running board. The wrench fit the first bolt he tried, and the second and the third. No switching tools, no searching through a dozen sizes. He tried the wrench on a mounting bracket deeper in the engine bay, the same fit. His hand paused in midair. "Do you see it now?" he whispered. The others did. The Americans had made maintenance idiot-proof, not by dumbing down the vehicle, but by eliminating complexity that didn't matter. German vehicles, in contrast, were like puzzles meant for craftsmen. 40 different bolt sizes, tight tolerances, hidden fasteners, immaculate machining, beautiful but fragile in the wrong hands. And in 1944, most of Germany's hands were no longer skilled mechanics. They were teenagers, exhausted conscripts, men pulled from collapsing fronts with barely a week of training. They were fighting a war built for experts when the world required generalists. The middle mechanic pressed a thumb against the truck's suspension leaf springs, thick and crude but unbreakable. He thought of the Opel Blitz torsion bars back home, elegant and efficient until they bent under real strain, requiring factory-level tools to realign. The GMC springs, a hammer, and a tree stump would do. The realization spread between them like a fever. Germany had engineered for perfection. America had engineered for scale, and in total war, scale always wins. The eldest mechanic stepped back and looked at the truck differently now, not as a vehicle, but as a statement. Every corner of it screamed the same message. "We can afford to lose this, can you? I was not coming." He imagined a convoy of these moving with machine, like rhythm across France, identical, interchangeable, replaceable. Each one bringing fuel, ammunition, food, life itself to the front. Meanwhile, the Wehrmacht moved on horses. 5-0. 0 horses for a single division. Animals that needed water, rest, shelter, veterinary care. Animals that died in mud, froze in winter, buckled under artillery shock waves. The Germans had spent years building the finest tactical army in the world. One capable of brilliant breakthroughs, perfect maneuvers, elite marksmanship. But they had never built the machine that sustains an army. Logistics simple enough to survive stupidity, mud, weather, overloading, and chaos. The young mechanic shut the passenger door. It latched with a hollow, unsatisfying metallic clack. Cheap, he thought, undignified. But then another thought swept in. Cheap is what you build by the 100 zeros. 0. He looked again at the engine, the bolts, the lay-out, the tools, and finally the stamped serial number, one of tens of thousands, produced that year alone, and a chill ran down his spine. Whenever Germany lost a vehicle, it was a tragedy. Whenever the Americans lost one, it was paperwork. That was the moment the three mechanics understood something their commanders never would. Germany wasn't outfought. Germany was outbuilt, and now they were staring at the machine that proved it. The three mechanics didn't speak for a moment. There was nothing to say. Everything they needed to understand was sitting quietly in front of them. A truck that looked like it belonged on a farm, but operated like it had been built for the apocalypse. The youngest finally broke the silence. "Look at the fuel lines," he said. They were thick, rubberized, clamped in place with simple metal brackets that could be opened with a flathead screwdriver. No special fittings, no calibration, no delicate couplings that required the practice touch of a trained craftsman. If a line ruptured, a soldier could replace it in minutes. If one kinked, he could straighten it by hand. The Germans stared. They were used to elegant braided lines, precise machined fittings, tolerances tight enough to make engineers proud and armies vulnerable. "Do you understand what this means?" the eldest murmured. It did not need an answer. Asterisk, the Americans weren't designing trucks. They were designing instructions for an army. Asterisk, asterisk. This was the first part of the revelation that tore through the mechanics' worldview. German vehicles were made for mechanics like them, men who had spent years in factories. Apprenticeships, workshops, men who could diagnose a problem by sound, identify a component by feel, improvise with limited parts. The American truck removed the need for any of that expertise. Every hose, every clamp, every bracket was placed where it could be reached without disassembling half. The vehicle, the distributor sat on top, not buried behind reinforcing plates. The carburetor was accessible from the side. 3 bolts, 2 linkages, and it came free. The middle mechanic tried one bolt at random. The wrench fit. He tried another, same fit. He tried a third, same. He turned to the others, his face pale. This truck was not designed for mechanics, he whispered. It was designed for soldiers, not skilled workers, not specialists, just ordinary soldiers, and millions of them. Once that idea sank in, the engine bay transformed before their eyes. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't crude manufacturing. It was intention, a philosophy in metal, a truck that expected to be mistreated and demanded nothing in return. Where a German vehicle might crack a fitting if over-tightened, the GMC used forgiving metals. Where a German fuel pump required adjustment, the American one simply worked at factory settings for years. Where the Opel Blitz had delicate torsion bars, the GMC had brute force leaf springs. The difference was spiritual. Germany believed precision conquered chaos. America believed chaos was guaranteed, so design around it. To the mechanics, this was heresy. Back home, a vehicle that did not showcase engineering elegance was considered inferior by default. Craftsmanship was pride. Complexity was proof of sophistication. A mechanic earned respect by taming a machine that punished mistakes. But this truck had no pride, and it punished no one. The eldest tapped the fender, listening to the dull, unimpressive ring of stamped steel. "You see this?" he asked. "This is weakness." But halfway through the sentence he stopped. His own words betrayed him. Weakness, no. Weakness was depending on special steel foundries during bombing raids. Weakness was requiring expert welders who had already been drafted into infantry units. Weakness was building a truck that could not be repaired by the men who drove it. The GMC wasn't weak. It was indifferent. It didn't care who touched it, who repaired it, who abused it. It didn't care if the roads were mud, if the load exceeded limits, or if maintenance was skipped for weeks. It simply endured, and armies built on endurance always outlast armies built on finesse. Then came the second revelation, one that made their hands shake. Stamped into the chassis rail, barely visible under layers of dirt, was a production mark, Pontiac Motor Division JoJo by Susan. The middle mechanic wiped the grime with his sleeve. Another number appeared underneath. Not a serial number, a batch number. He read it again, unsure if he understood. 150,000. The youngest frowned. No, that can't be right. It is, the eldest said quietly. That is not a serial, that is a production count. The numbers seemed impossible. In 1943 alone, a single American factory had produced more trucks than Germany could produce in the entire war across all truck categories. One factory, 1 year. Germany, with all its precision and craftsmanship, produced fewer Opel Blitz trucks across multiple facilities than the Americans produced GMC, while also building tanks, planes, bombs, and ships at the same time. The mechanic stared at the number the way one stares at the name of a disease. How do you fight an enemy who can replace an entire fleet in the time it takes you to replace a single axle? The eldest closed the hood gently, almost reverently. This is not a vehicle, he whispered. This is a verdict. The third revelation came not from the truck, but from memory. The weeks prior had been filled with strange rumors. American supply lines moving with impossible speed. Fuel convoys appearing out of nowhere. A constant hum of engines the Germans could never match. At first, these stories sounded exaggerated. Propaganda, exaggeration, fear. But now looking at the truck, they made sense. If every GMC was this simple, if every part was interchangeable, if every soldier could keep his own vehicle running, then the Americans were not just supplying an army. They were supplying momentum. Germany could win battles, but America could win time, and time multiplies force. Standing in the dust with the sun dipping behind the hedge, the three mechanics realized that their expertise, the very skill that defined their value, meant nothing against a truck that required no experts at all. War had changed. Germany had not, and the Americans had built the machine that proved it. They stayed with the truck longer than they intended. Originally, this was supposed to be a 5-minute inspection, a quick look at a captured vehicle before reporting back. But the longer they stared at the numbers stamped into the chassis, the more the world around them seemed to tilt. The youngest finally broke the silence, 100 fic, and in 1 year. He said it as if saying it aloud might change the truth. The eldest didn't answer. He didn't need to. The number sat there like a confession the Americans had accidentally left behind. Germany built trucks as if each one mattered. America built trucks as if none of them did. Asterisk, asterisk. That was the revelation burning through their minds. When Opel produced a Blitz, it was the product of craftsmen, careful machining, tight tolerances, and assembly methods that still looked more like workshops than factories, a piece of national pride. When the Americans produced a GMC, it was a statistical event. Line A makes the frame, Line B drops the engine, Line C attaches the body, Line D ships it out. The individuality of the machine was irrelevant. What mattered was how many left the factory each day. The middle mechanic knelt beside the rear axle, dragging his finger through dried mud. The mud line told its own story. The truck had been overloaded probably for hundreds of kilom, yet the suspension sat level. Leaf springs crude, heavy, forgiving. He had hated leaf springs as an apprentice. They were considered outdated, cheap, the kind of thing you found on farm wagons and municipal garbage trucks. But now they made sense. A torsion bar suspension, like on the Blitz, was a mechanical masterpiece. Smooth, efficient, lightweight. But when bent, it needed tools and alignment tables that only existed inside factories. When the leaf spring bent, you climbed under the truck with a hammer. One philosophy prioritized performance, the other prioritized survival. Which one wins a world war? The answer was squatting quietly in the grass. Before them, then came the math. the kind of math that crushes hope. The eldest mechanic pulled out a pencil and the back of a ration envelope. He began writing numbers slowly. Pontiac, Chevrolet, Ford, Dodge, International, Studebaker. The list kept going. Every name was a factory. Every factory produced trucks similar to this one. The youngest frowned. How many plants do they have? The middle mechanic shook his head. Dozens, maybe more. The eldest wrote a number, circled it, and turned the envelope around for them to see. B when 80 zeros, 00, the youngest asked. 80 00 trucks, the eldest said. For one American army of 40 divisions at minimum. It felt impossible. No, it felt unfair. Germany had divisions with fewer trucks than an American regiment. The youngest tried to protest, but the logic was merciless. If a single factory could produce 150 trucks in 1 year, if the Americans had a dozen factories doing the same, if every truck could be repaired by any soldier with a wrench, then the Americans were not just fighting a war. They were manufacturing victory. The middle mechanic leaned against the fender, staring at nothing. How do you defeat an enemy who can rebuild them? Logistics faster than you can damage it. No one answered. The fourth revelation struck when the supply officer arrived. They heard his motorcycle before they saw him, a whining engine struggling against the mud. When he stepped off, he looked at the GMC as if it were an archaeological relic. He wasn't a frontline soldier. He was a factory man, Opel Brandenburg pre-war. He knew production efficiency, the way a farmer knows soil. The mechanics walked him through what they'd found. He listened, expression tightening with each detail. Finally, he said, "You're looking at this wrong." They waited. "We see a simple truck, but what it represents." He tapped the fender. "Is an industrial system we cannot match." "What do you mean?" the youngest asked. He crouched, tracing the frame rails with his hand. "These rails," he said, "straight steel. Any mill can stamp it. This bed, standard lumber, this canvas, commercial fabric. Even the bolts, they're not special steel, just mass-produced fittings." The mechanics exchanged glances. "The Americans," he continued, "have designed a vehicle any factory can build. Not just automotive plants, stamp shops, lumber yards, textile producers. Everything here can be outsourced, duplicated, scaled." He looked at them the way a doctor looks at a patient he cannot save. Germany builds vehicles with talent. America builds them with capacity. The words hit harder than any artillery shell. Then he delivered the final blow in 943. The supply officer said quietly, "Germany produced 27,000 Opel Blitz trucks." The mechanics nodded. They already knew that number. He pointed at the production mark again. The Americans produced more than 20 times that number of this model alone. 20 times from one country, from one industrial base. In 1 year, the middle mechanic swallowed hard. "So if we destroy a convoy, there will be 2 more tomorrow," the supply officer said. "And if we destroy those, there will be 4 the next day." "And us?" the youngest asked, almost whispering. The officer's voice softened, but the words were merciless. "We cannot replace what we lose. Not vehicles, not wheel, not men." A silence fell over the group. Not the silence of contemplation, but the kind that descends when denial finally cracks. The truck was no longer a curiosity. It was an omen, a message from the future written in steel and stamped with numbers that Germany could never hope to match. The eldest mechanic closed his eyes. "We're not fighting an army," he said. "We're fighting their factories." The supply officer nodded. "And they will not run out." For the rest of that afternoon, the captured GMC sat surrounded by 4 Germans, 3 mechanics, and a supply officer, each wrestling with the same realization, but unable to say it aloud. If this was one truck, what did an army of them look like? It didn't take long to find out. The first shock came when they tried to move it. The mechanics expected the usual procedure with captured vehicles: drain the bad fuel, fight with the choke, coax the engine like a sick animal. Instead, the GMC started on the first turn. The youngest jerked back in surprise. Impossible. The engine didn't sputter, didn't cough, didn't hesitate. It behaved exactly like a machine designed for people who didn't care about machines. He put it in gear and eased forward. The truck didn't complain, didn't rattle, didn't ground under weight. It simply moved, steady as a heartbeat. Leaf springs flexed with smooth predictability. 6. Wheel drive bit into the mud. No slipping, no fishtailing, no delicate balancing act the Germans were used to with their two-wheel drive Blitz trucks. The eldest mechanic muttered. Blitz would be stuck already. They all knew he was right. Here in the churned farmland of northern France, a place where German supply vehicles routinely bogged down, where horses strained in mud up to their knees, the American truck glided forward with the indifference of a tank. It was not elegant, it was not beautiful, it was inevitable. The supply officer watched carefully. This, he said quietly, is why they don't fear terrain anymore. The second shock came when they overloaded it. Captured trucks were expected to work beyond their limits. This was standard German procedure. Fuel shortages and vehicle scarcity meant every captured vehicle became a pack mule, so they loaded the GMC. Ammunition crates, fuel cans, spare parts, rations, double its nominal capacity. A Blitz would have protested immediately. Its suspension would creak. Its balance would shift. The engine would run hot. The GMC, it behaved like nothing had changed. The youngest stared at the suspension. How can something this crude take so much weight? The supply officer didn't look away, because crude is cheap. Cheap is fast. Fast wins wars. Another layer of denial peeled away. The third shock was the mud road east of the village. It had rained the night before, not heavily, but just enough to turn the clay into a sucking, booting mess. Reports from the front said several German vehicles had stalled on similar roads all week. The mechanics aimed the GMC toward the worst stretch. The truck entered the mud. The wheels sank slightly, then continued forward. No spinning, no momentum loss, just steady, relentless progress. The youngest laughed, not out of amusement, but disbelief. "This is a tractor," he said, "a military tractor." The eldest corrected him. "No, this is freedom." "Our army hasn't known that feeling in years," he meant it. Germany's supply chain was a prisoner of its own design perfection. Every road, every bridge, every weather shift was a potential disaster. The Americans had removed those disasters entirely. Asterisk, asterisk. Then came the day that broke whatever hope remained. The convoy asterisk asterisk, it happened near dusk, a week after the GMC had been pressed into German service. The 276th Infantry Division was repositioning eastward, retreating in the shadow of collapsing fronts. The mechanics heard at first a low continuous rumble behind the trees. Not thunder, not artillery engines, but not engines like German columns. With their uneven sputtering and intermittent coughing fits, this was rhythmic, coordinated, mechanical certainty. They climbed a small rise overlooking a parallel road and froze. A convoy of GMC trucks stretched across the horizon. Not a tactical column, not a movement under fire, just logistics, just supply. Dozens of trucks, then hundreds. Identical silhouettes, identical speed, identical spacing. A moving conveyor belt of material, food, fuel, ammunition, lives. The middle mechanic whispered, where are the horses?" It was not a joke. It was a genuine question, and it hurt. Their division alone required 5,000 horses for movement. 5,000 living bodies, eating, drinking, weakening, dying. This convoy had none because the Americans didn't use horses. They replaced them with engines, and then replaced those engines by the tens of thousands. The supply officer closed his eyes. "Now you see why this truck terrified me," he said. "A single GMC is just a machine, but 1,000 GMC is a new form of warfare." The eldest watched the convoy, jaw clenched. "They don't pause," he said. "They don't wait for weather. They don't bury animals. They don't ration movement." He exhaled. "Slow, defeated. They simply move," and behind that movement was the harshest truth of all. Germany fought brilliant tactical battles. America fought gravity itself and won. The fourth shock came later that night. In the officer's calculations by lantern light, the supply officer scribbled numbers on a torn map: distances, fuel consumption, load capacity, American output, German shortages. When he finished, he placed his pencil down. "We can't stop them," he said. The mechanics waited. "We can kill their soldiers. We can destroy their tanks, but their logistics. He shook his head slowly. Their logistics have no breaking point. He pointed toward the sleeping GMC, silhouetted in the lamplight. That truck is not just a vehicle. It is an ecosystem, one our industry cannot match, one our doctrine cannot disrupt, and one our army cannot survive without. The room fell silent. War had rules. Once rules the Germans understood well, but now staring at that truck, they realized a new rule had replaced them all. Quantity is a weapon. Simplicity is a weapon. Predictability is a weapon. And America had mastered all three. By autumn, the GMC was no longer a curiosity. It was a lifeline. The 276th Infantry Division had lost 2 more Opel Blitz trucks to mechanical failures and another to artillery fire. The Americans lost trucks too often to the same causes, but the difference was cry simple. Germany could not replace a truck. America didn't even notice when one was gone. The captured GMC carried ammunition one day, rations the next. It hauled stretchers, towed damaged guns, filed field reports. Whatever job should have required a dozen horses or 2 Blitz trucks, the GMC did alone to the mechanics. That machine had become both a symbol and a reminder. A reminder of a war they were already losing, even while they still advanced on maps drawn at headquarters. And then came Hitler's last gamble. Ardennes, the final offensive, the last roll of the dice. The order spread through German lines like a spark through dry hay. A massive winter attack meant to split Allied forces, capture fuel depots, and turn the war by shock. But even before the first shot, the mechanics knew what the generals wouldn't admit. This offensive depended on fuel Germany didn't have and trucks Germany couldn't build. Panzer commanders received explicit instructions. Use captured American vehicles whenever possible. They weren't suggestions, they were lifelines. The irony bit deep. Germany's last hope of breaking the Western Front depended on the very machines that symbolized why they were losing it. Day 1 of the offensive, a confession in steel. Snow fell heavy, muffling the sound of engines. The German armored columns crawled forward, powerful, determined, lethal. But behind them, a tale of logistical desperation, horses shivering under loads meant for engines, Blitz trucks struggling on iced roads, coughing black smoke, tires spinning helplessly, and interspersed among them like foreign organs transplanted into a dying body, captured GMC trucks and Dodge WWII vehicles. The 3 mechanics watched this bizarre convoy with hollow eyes. Germany's finest tanks at the front, America's supply system dragging behind. The youngest said what they were all thinking. We're not attacking with our strength. We're attacking with theirs. No one contradicted him. Day 3. Fuel starvation arrives before the enemy does. The first to halt were the panzers, not due to enemy fire, not due to breakdown. The tanks simply ran dry. Fuel trucks never arrived. Some had been destroyed by Allied aircraft. More had broken down in the winter mud. Several never left their depots. Mechanical issues, frozen components, inadequate spare parts. But the American-built vehicles, every captured GMC still moved. They started in the cold, they tolerated bad fuel, their batteries held charge better, their engines demanded less coaxing. They pushed forward with the same indifferent reliability that had stunned the mechanics months earlier. A bitter joke spread among the infantry. We should paint our whole army olive drab. But humor couldn't hide reality. The offensive was bleeding out through its supply lines. The GMC trucks, stolen, patched, mismatched, were now the only logistical thread keeping certain units alive. A captured enemy truck had become more dependable than Germany's own war machine. Day 5, the collapse everyone saw coming. Snowstorms thickened. Allied air power returned in full force once clouds cleared. Fuel trucks became prime targets. Horse-drawn units froze in place, and somewhere along a forest road east of Street Vith, the 3 Wehrmacht mechanics witnessed a scene they would never forget. Königsstager, King Tiger, the pride of German armor, a metal monster weighing nearly 70 tons, sat abandoned in a roadside ditch. Not knocked out, not disabled, not sabotaged, just empty. Inside the turret, Someone had scratched a note. Kind Tipwell, the youngest, stared at the soot-blackened exhaust. "That tank cost millions of rice marks," he said quietly. The supply officer looked at the GMC beside them. "This truck cost the Americans what?" A few days of factory output. The middle mechanic shook his head. His breath fogged in the cold. A week, a day, less, no answer felt right, but the truth settled around them like snow. A single abandoned German tank represented years of precious labor. A single destroyed American truck represented hours of replaceable work. And in that comparison lay the death sentence for the offensive. The moment the illusion shattered, by the second week, German units were forced to cannibalize their own logistics. Fuel intended for supply trucks went into tanks. Fuel for tanks went into half-tracks. Fuel for half-tracks went into whatever American vehicle still ran. The Wehrmacht wasn't just fighting a logistical battle. It was losing one it never had a chance in. The mechanics watched as officers ordered retreat positions. Orders changed by the hour, not due to strategy, but due to fuel starvation. The youngest pointed at the GMC still running engine. "At least this one will bring us home." But the eldest answered with something far harsher. "No, this one shows why we can never go forward again." The supply officer turned away, unable to watch the King Tiger being left behind. A monument to a war Germany no longer had the means to fight. "Perfection," he said bitterly, "is worthless when your enemy builds replacements faster than you build masterpieces." And so the Ardennes offensive, Germany's last gamble, died the same way the war itself would. Not in a blaze of glory, but under the weight of logistics that never existed. Asterisk, asterisk. The three mechanics climbed back into their captured GMC, listening to the engine hum in the frozen air, steady, reliable, indifferent. A truck meant for a farm road in Iowa was now Germany's most reliable supply vehicle. A weapon of simplicity was defeating an army of brilliance, and the men who understood it best were the ones behind the wheel. March 1, 009. 145 arrived with the weight of inevitability. The 276th Infantry Division, exhausted, undersupplied, and collapsing, drifted backward toward the Rhine. The GMC was still running a stubborn, humming contradiction that refused to die. The Opel Blitz trucks, most had frozen, broken, or simply quit. By April, the division could no longer call itself a fighting formation, and when American infantry finally swept through, resistance was brief and hopeless. The mechanics surrendered without pretending otherwise. Their war, at least the part fought with rifles, was over, but their education was about to enter its final brutal phase. The first shock came not in battle, but at the motor pool of the processing camp. After capture, prisoners were marched to a holding area near Collins, a bleak collection of tents, trucks, and temporary fences. The GMC rolled with them the entire way, its engine still dependable. When they arrived, a U.S. motor sergeant, broad, shouldered, oil-stained hands, uniform unbuttoned at the collar, walked up, pointed at the truck, and asked with casual confidence, "You boys the ones doing maintenance on that thing?" The mechanics hesitated. The sergeant grinned. "Good. We're short on hands. Come with me. No interrogation, no suspicion, just a simple truth. An army that maintains hundreds of thousands of trucks needs mechanics, even German ones." He led them into a motor pool unlike anything they had ever seen. It was not a workshop. It was a machine in itself. Rows of GMC, Dodges, and Studebakers lined up with geometric precision. Engines open, wheels off, parts spread across wooden tables. Soldiers, not mechanics. Just soldiers moved between trucks with wrenches in hand. Each one performing tasks the Germans couldn't believe required no specialized training. One American private was replacing a carburetor with the speed of a man flipping through a magazine. The youngest mechanic whispered, "That would take us an hour." He did it in 5 minutes. The sergeant overheard and laughed. "He's not even the fastest one." The eldest mechanic studied the works. Each was stocked with standardized parts, spark plugs identical across models, hoses that fit multiple engines, bolts sorted into only a few sizes. Everything about the space radiated simplicity scaled to infinity. The sergeant gestured proudly. "You see, we design our truck so two men with field tools can do a complete engine overhaul in 8 hours." The Germans froze. 8 hours. An Opel Blitz overhaul required hoists, alignment rigs, careful measurements, specialist tools, and often multiple days. The sergeant noticed their stunned silence. "What? You guys don't do that?" The eldest answered honestly. "Not without a factory." The sergeant blinked at that. Truly blinked, as if the idea simply didn't compute. "You need a factory to fix a truck." The Germans didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Then came the revelation the Germans had feared most. The Americans weren't bragging, they were understating. Over the next days and then weeks, the mechanics were assigned regular duty in the motor pool. They worked alongside Americans who treated maintenance as routine, almost boring work. There were no fights against stubborn bolts, no improvisation born from shortages, no hoarding of rare components, because nothing was rare. A truck needed a new generator, grab one off the shelf, a tire blew, they had stacks, a gearbox cracked, swap it, no ceremony, no salvage operation, no mourning for the machine. If a truck was too damaged, assign it to the scrap heap. Not because parts were scarce, but because a brand new replacement would arrive faster than the old one could be fixed. One afternoon, the sergeant noticed the middle mechanic staring at a pile of discarded parts. "You okay?" The German nodded slowly. I cannot believe you throw these away." The sergeant shrugged. "If fixing it costs more time than replacing it, why bother? We have production backing us up." Production, always production. The word had become a specter, haunting the Germans ever since that roadside inspection. And now they were inside the beast's stomach, watching it digest and regenerate trucks effortlessly. Then came the conversation that broke whatever pride they had left. One evening, while the sun dipped behind rows of olive-drab silhouettes, the sergeant handed each German a rag and leaned against a fender. "You want to know how many of these trucks we built?" The mechanics stayed silent. "Over 500,000, and that's just this model. 500,000. Not tanks, not rifles, not aircraft, trucks," the sergeant continued, unaware of the devastation he was inflicting. "And that doesn't even count the Dodges, Internationals, Studebakers. Hell, we built millions of vehicles in total." The middle mechanic swallowed. "Millions with anime," the sergeant said proudly. "That's what won the war, not the big weapons, the little ones that never stop moving." The Germans stared at the endless line of trucks, engines warm, parts stocked, fuel in barrels. They understood what he meant. America didn't just design for simplicity. America designed for momentum. Where German logistics fractured with every loss, American logistics absorbed losses like drops into an ocean. A truck lost, replace it. A convoy attacked, send 2 more. A supply route threatened our route with thousands of vehicles. War to the Americans wasn't an art, it was an industry, and that was the lesson the 3 Germans carried with them. America didn't win because its machines were better. America won because its machines did not have to be ****. A GMC didn't need sophistication. It needed endurance. It didn't need elegance. It needed compatibility. It didn't need brilliance. It needed numbers that broke the meaning of numbers. Simplicity was not a flaw. It was an empire. And Germany, with its love for refinement, its obsession with precision, its worship of craftsmanship, had built an army incapable of surviving the very nature of modern warfare. The youngest said it quietly, almost to himself. "We spent years perfecting machines. They spent years perfecting the system that makes machines." The eldest nodded. "We never had a chance, did we?" The supply officer didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer surrounded them in steel, in engines, in crates of parts, in rows of identical trucks. An entire philosophy made physical, a way of war Germany had never understood until it was far too late. Months passed before the 3 mechanics finally boarded the trucks that would take them to repatriation camps. Rows of GMC idled at the edge of the motor pool, their engines humming like a choir of identical voices. Even now, even as prisoners, the Germans were surrounded by the same machine that had shattered their understanding of war. The youngest touched the door of the truck, taking them home. He had spent months repairing dozens of identical vehicles. His hands knew their weight, his ears knew their sound, his mind knew their meaning. "This sound," he murmured, "it's the sound of a country that knew how to fight a long war." No one disagreed. Returning to a lost homeland, Germany was rubble, factories collapsed, rail lines severed, bridges broken, cities hollowed. The precision engineering culture the Germans had once warped now limped through ruins like a wounded animal. But scattered everywhere across roads, depots, construction sites were the unmistakable silhouettes of GMC trucks. They carried lumber for rebuilding homes, food for displaced families, medical supplies for shattered towns. The very vehicles that had exposed Germany's weakness were now part of its recovery. The supply officer, once a man who measured tolerances to the tenth of a millimeter, now measured survival in crates delivered on the back of an American truck. He found work in a reconstruction depot, training young Germans who had never held a wrench. They learned quickly, not because they were students of engineering, but because the trucks they worked on were designed to be understandable at a glance. "Why is everything so easy to reach?" one apprentice asked. The supply officer closed his eyes. "Because the Americans build machines for the world as it is," he said, "not for the world as they wish it to be." It was the clearest summary he would ever give. The GMC as a teacher, not a trophy. In time, German engineers and factory managers, many of whom had once served in the Wehrmacht, began studying the American vehicles with cold, sober curiosity, not to copy them exactly, not to mimic their size or shape, but to understand the philosophy that lay beneath their bolts. And what they learned reshaped German industry for generations. Standardization had reduces cows. Interchangeability multiplies workforce capability. Production speed beats production beauty. Maintenance is part of the weapon. A design that forgives mistakes outlasts a design that requires mastery. Before the war, the Germans believed that excellence came from precision. After the war, they learned that excellence also came from scalability. The Blitz had been a symbol of pre-war German pride. The GMC became a symbol of post-war German clarity. Because the GMC was not a masterpiece of engineering, it was a masterpiece of strategy disguised as a truck. This revelation changed how entire companies, future giants like Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen approached design and production in the rebuilding years. The Germans did not abandon craftsmanship. They combined it with something new, the American philosophy of scale, and in that synthesis, the modern German industrial powerhouse was born. The real secret of the war, and why few talk about it. Historians often tell the story of World War II through tanks, planes, generals, battles, the dramatic, the cinematic, the explosive. But wars are not won by the things that explode. They are won by the things that never stop moving. Trucks, tools, fuel cans, replacement parts, simple engines that anyone can fix, a system that does not collapse when brilliance is unavailable. That roadside inspection in France, forgotten, undocumented, undiscussed, was a quiet glimpse into the truth. Germany fought a short war brilliantly. America fought a long war relentlessly. The brilliant mattered, the relentlessness won, and nothing embodied that relentlessness more than the GMC CCKW. Not because it was beautiful, not because it was powerful, not because it was advanced, but because it was forgiving, replaceable, repayable, multipliable, ubiquitous, eternal in function, not in form. A weapon not of metal, but of philosophy, the final realization. Years later, when interviewed for post-war trade journals, former Wehrmacht mechanics were sometimes asked, "What was the most important lesson you learned from American vehicles?" Most spoke of standardization, some spoke of interchangeability, others mentioned production scale. But one answer from a former mechanic now working in the automotive sector captured the truth better than any historian ever had. "We built perfect machines. They built machines that made perfection irrelevant."